Welcome to The Jungle, where we discuss social science and applications to business and society. My name is Doug Lepisto, and I am co-founder of Sleeping Giant Capital and the Center for Principled Leadership and Business Strategy at Western Michigan University. Today, my guest is Dr. Wendy Smith. Dr. Smith is the Dana J. Johnson Professor of Management and Faculty Director of the Women's Leadership Initiative at the Lerner College of Business and Economics at the University of Delaware. Dr. Smith is a leading expert on how leaders navigate strategic paradoxes that involve contradictory yet interdependent demands. We discuss her recent book, Both and Thinking, Embracing Creative Tensions to Solve Your Toughest Problems. I hope you enjoy the conversation. I'd love to. So, just as a quick bio for people who don't know, you're the Dana J. Johnson Professor of Management and faculty director of the Women's Leadership Initiative at the Lerner College of Business and Economics at the University of Delaware.
Wow, that sounds so formal, and that is so correct.
And you're in Australia though right now.
I am.
And is this sabbatical for you?
It is. Yes.
So this is you're doing the thing that all academics aspire to, right? Which is having some free time to really think, to use. If you use that time productively, and if we believed in people, I mean, it's such an incredible thing for society. Like if it is done in the right way, you know, it's not a 6-month vacation. It's so, when people say that, or people say, you know, well, professors don't work in, you know, that rap, I just think there's so much value that can be created by having that time, and you're in a different place and you have your mind's open to things. What has that been like?
Well, I think that every profession should embed a structured break into it. And I think there's this tension about being on sabbatical, about being productive in the time, taking this coveted time to produce versus being just sort of leaning back and being able to observe and engage and take things in. And because I think that we do a lot in the world, and we don't spend a lot of time just being and engaging and observing. And I think that we need to force ourselves to do those kinds of things, because otherwise we continue to do without being thoughtful about the meaning, the value, the importance. This allows us to take some turns toward the direction of our values and what we care about and what's important to us.
And innovation. You're seeing it from a vantage you haven't seen it before. And that can get you out of your problem. I mean, I was just in Boulder, Colorado with my wife, and we were there this last weekend. It was the first time we've gotten away in, I don't even know, years. Right. And we get out there and there was like thing after thing we talked about. We're just like, oh yeah, problem solved. Oh, okay. That makes sense. And all these, because you have the space to like think about it and to see it differently, because you're away from it.
Well, and I think it is that in our typical lives, we are constrained in some way, in part time-wise. There's just a whole to-do list. And so we want to attack and address that to-do list really quickly. But we're also constrained because we are, to your point earlier, we're in these like mental spaces about who we are, what's our identity, and how we have to act based on either our expectations of ourselves or other people's expectations of us. The first time I saw the value of this was actually when I finished high school. I ended up taking a year off before going to college. And then when I finished college, even more powerfully, I took a year, and even the language is problematic. I took a year off, as people, what are you going to do? You're not going to get back into your profession quickly. I had to put aside, I actually had a consulting job that I had to put aside. And then I was so committed to this year and the experience that I took a second year and had to let go of the consulting job. And it was scary at the time. I had a lot of voices saying to me that this was problematic because it wasn't the traditional path. And when I look back at how I've made decisions in my life, it was some of the most powerful influences, the things that I did, the friends that I made, the just chance to live and be out there in the world. Huge.
I took a road trip before I went to a master's program out west for 3 weeks, and in my parents' van, by myself, and you just, yeah, you, and those are these periods that are really productive. I mean, they're so productive. It's the paradox, right? It's the notion of like it's ease and serendipity, and that allows these things to happen versus like planful, willful, on the whiteboard kind of, moments,
I
right?
used to have this sign, and it probably is still there back in the States, above my office that said, "Go slow to go fast." There's the paradoxical relationship there. Sometimes the pause, the let's slow this down, let's think, actually enables you to be more productive, more effective, more, move
Mm-hmm.
faster in the end. So sometimes we have to pause to get there quicker, to go slow to go fast.
So you have your undergrad from Yale, PhD from Harvard, and you focus on strategic paradoxes. I'm just reading your bio, how leaders in senior teams effectively respond to contradictory yet interdependent demands. And so you are also now at the intersection of doing research, but also reaching a popular audience and trying to communicate these ideas to, which is, I think, a really, as I mean, in some ways, this podcast, I think, given the guests I'm having on now, is going to be this liminal space for those people who are trying to figure that out, because you're in these, it's different languages to be able to speak to those audiences, and where the value is. And so I'd love to, we're going to explore some of those things about, how you think about this in business, and I have a couple of things I want to talk through with how you think about, a couple key issues that people are having, in organizations that I see, right, as someone who's, started a company, buying companies, that I can see, really clearly that your work has a ton of relevance to. But the first thing I wanted to hear you kind of talk about was, I mean, paradox is something that is all the time, yet somehow it feels timely now. So, and I don't know if that's timely now in the West. Is that timely now globally, or how you characterize like the emergence of this as like a thing that people would be buying a book and wanting to talk to you about? Why now, and for whom?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think for everyone, and in part, why now? Um, Paradox is kind of like that bubbling volcano that sort of sits there at all moments, but bubbles up and erupts in certain conditions. And so, just to get us to take a step back, um, so what we understand paradox to be is that we all face tensions, we all face challenges, all kinds of things that happen all the time, and we frame them as dilemmas, choices that we have to make. So it's everything from, what should I do with my career? What hats should I wear? When should I wear those hats? Or what should, a company do when it's trying to think through its sustainability strategy or its innovation strategy? And there's choices that we feel like we have to make, but underlying those choices are these interdependent opposites. So work life has these persistent interdependent opposites, these paradoxes of focusing on myself or focusing on the other person, focusing on my career, focusing on the rest of my life, thinking about, the sustainability issues have these underlying persistent tensions between being more mission driven or market driven, planet or purpose, innovation tensions are today or tomorrow. Those never go away. We would say that those exist in the substructure of our lives, everybody, everywhere, but they bubble up, they erupt like this volcano when under pressure, either because we have limited resources and we feel like we have to make difficult choices between our resources, or because there's a lot of change where today becomes tomorrow really quickly. So we have, and when I say we, it's myself and my co-author, Marianne Lewis, we say there's three main conditions in which these things bubble up. Scarcity, which is the limited resources; change, which is things today become tomorrow quickly; and plurality, which is that there are more diverse voices coming to the table that create these tensions between stakeholders. And so it's a bit of an academic answer, but all of those conditions are really in front of us right now. We're facing huge crises, huge challenges across the world that have to do with climate change or racial inequity and diversity, equity, inclusion issues that have to do with, go back to work and burnout and people navigating their work experiences. And all of those have these underlying paradoxes that what we would argue is that if we see those, if we notice them, if we understand them, we could do a better job of navigating the decisions around them.
So, what makes you want to research paradoxes and understand them better?
Hmm. Well, I mean, Doug, I don't know if you experienced this, but I remember when I was in a class with Richard Hackman, who wrote brilliantly about teams, and he said, research is me search, which I loved because he put on his website, he's a teams guy. He wrote about teams and he put on his website a photo of him on a basketball team where he was the only guy on the team kind of looking outward and not in the huddle and engaged in the team. So clearly he was trying to study himself. I think it's intriguing to me because I've dealt with all kinds of tensions and wanted to know better, wanted to understand, from my own, to your point, my own, starting with this question of should I be an academic uh, who studies issues, or should I be out there a leader, practitioner, whatever you want to call it, who engages? And that tension was so present for me in my own academic PhD process, and that was just a small smattering of, well, how do I do this better? There's got to be a better way.
So, what would you paint for? So, say it's the business owner who is, or a senior executive who's thinking about their organization. What would you say is would you imagine their biggest paradox they face on a day to day?
Mm, there's so many.
Do you
There's
think
so
it's
many.
different? Do you think it's different for someone who's running a small business versus we at Sleeping Giant, if I put that hat on, we look at a lot of small businesses, under 200 employees, size. So
Yeah.
they're not big, but I mean, they can still be bigger than a startup. Do you have a sense of what the paradox is like? And so if they were listening, they were like, yeah, I can put what we're talking about into my world. What would be the one you'd spotlight for them?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple that sort of bubble up for me, right? Particularly in that small medium size. Look at the small size for entrepreneurs. There's this ongoing tension between trying to expand, become more process oriented, become more efficiency oriented, while still be scrappy and quick, and everybody's doing, all hands on the ball. So there's that tension, which is that growth space for entrepreneurs. For entrepreneurs, there's the personal tension and an ongoing basis between I am the company and that amount of work and commitment and engagement versus, I can have some distance and some boundaries around this company. And so there's that personal work life that comes up for entrepreneurs when I talk to them. When you move into that medium space, one of the greatest challenges that I've been engaging with leaders around is the question of scalability, right? So depth versus breadth. Do we go deep in what we do? Do we have to be big and large and grow in order to define ourselves as successful? How do we navigate the right sweet spot there from a strategic perspective? Increasingly, and I talk to a lot of companies where there is a question of mission versus profit market. And that is not only true for what we have labeled social enterprises. I mean, that's true for companies broadly, which is what are we trying to do here? And how does that translate into financial bottom line? And where are they aligned and where are they not? And how do I deal with that ongoing tension? So I think all of that comes up. And, and indeed, to your point, this tension between innovation is how I got into studying paradoxes. That's where I first explored these issues because I was studying how companies navigate. What do we do today? How does it work? What's efficient? How do we make it stable? How do we make it so that we have something we can rely on? And how do we throw that to the wind and be more risky and try new things? And so this, in our academic language, we talk about it as exploring new opportunities and exploiting existing certainties, right? But that's an ongoing tension in our personal lives, in our small businesses and our large businesses. They all pop up.
So maybe let's start with the idea around innovation.
Yeah.
So let's say you're an established business, you're 50 employees, 100 employees, you have a great company that's, been super successful, but you don't have a big HR department. You don't have like, all these departments and all these people, but so everybody's kind of wearing different hats at different times. And you've run a phase of your growth to where you've matured and you're looking for that next step, right? You're
Yeah.
looking to go to the next place of growth. And, you're going to try to bring this kind of more innovative mindset in at the same time that you're going to need to kind of grow and scale and maintain some of those the processes that got you to where you are. So you're in that kind of space. How would you bring that mindset in from a paradox perspective? Like, what do you concretely do to kind of start to bring that into like a culture where people are really trying to innovate more every day in their role?
Yeah. I'm going to give you three quick steps and then we can unpack them. So this is going to it might sound a bit formulaic, but here's the three steps to start with. The first is change the question. So even in the way that you ask the question, it sort of powerfully shifts from, okay, do we buckle down and make sure that our processes are really clear and consistent before, and then innovate, to how do we accommodate both? So
Mm-hmm.
that's huge because if people start to notice, what they might notice is how often we frame competing demands in our lives as either ors. And as soon as we can reframe and change the question, it opens up new possibilities. So now once we're asking the how can we question, how can we accommodate both of these mindsets at the same time? So the next step is we talk about it as separate and connect. And here's the important piece, which is that people try and rush to, okay, what's the win-win? What's the way in which these things go together, the synergy? And before you get there, and in order to get there more powerfully, the first thing you got to do is pull these things apart and say, what's at stake for each of these? What is each worth? What's each value? What's different between them? What do I need? Because they are distinct mindsets, distinct sets of activities and practices and things. What do I need in order to be more established, be more stable, be more structured, be more process oriented? What's that about? And what do I need to be more innovative in an innovative mindset where I'm risk taking and changing? What's that about? And where are these things different from one another? And what is unique about each? So, part of this wearing multiple hats or doing multiple things is starting with saying, they actually do involve different sets of activities and different ways of being. And it's through that kind of analysis. Now, that's the kind of analysis that will often lead us to what we would frame as either or thinking, because then the next step would be to choose between them and pick one. Well, what we're suggesting is that's the kind of analysis that leads us into a place to say, okay, well, how can I do both of them, accommodate both of them, bring them together, find the points of interdependencies, find ways in which I can engage them. So it's a bit of that. And then the third step, we label it as moving from making a choice to choosing, or finding a balance to balancing. And here's the important piece of that, which is that both engaging paradox has two possible outcomes. The first is finding this win-win. That's what most people think about when they think about the both and. Like, is there this ideal space, this ideal integration, this ideal creative integration between the two options? And we use the metaphor of the mule for that, because the mule is the oldest bred hybrid, biological hybrid between a donkey and a horse, to bring, stronger than a horse, smarter than a donkey, bring them together. And the truth is that the first thing I noticed when I was studying this at IBM and how they managed innovation in existing products. And I was like, okay, they're going to find all these win-wins and it's going to be like this almost kumbaya experience. And they didn't. That's not how they navigated these tensions. But the companies that did it really well were kind of I like to say sort of expanding the aperture, zooming out, moving further away to not just look at a decision by itself, but look at a decision in the context of a broader set of decisions over time, so that they were accommodating competing ideas over time and over space, um, in their decision making. And in the research I did, I called it dynamic decision making. But Marianne and I use this metaphor of a tightrope walker, because the idea is that the tightrope walker is never fully balanced on the tightrope. They're always balancing, but to get to the other end, that they're not overemphasizing one or agenda, or overemphasizing the left or overemphasizing the right, overemphasizing one agenda or overemphasizing the other. They're moving in these kind of micro shift ways. So part of the innovation space is saying, okay, this decision might reinforce our risk-taking, more risky, experience of trying to do something new and experiment. But over here, we're going to make a different decision where we're going to really buckle down and say, you know what, we're going to be much more risk averse and try and manage stability. And we're going to do that in these sort of micro shifting ways, so that it's not over accommodating one or the other.
The temporal shifting is really interesting, as a notion that you're cycling between these things versus trying to just put them together at one single point. That really resonates with some things I'm working on right now, actually. That's really helpful. But to your point, this 3-step thing. So yeah, what do I do? Typically I will take a question, I'll break it down on my whiteboard to its parts and make them as choices. And I won't kind of do that little slight reframe of and look at the lump, not so far up in my kind of decision tree, but in my but kind of one step up in its kind of how those things are put together. But then this notion of like separating them, right? Like, and opens you the possibility that you could. And then when you could, you look at it and you're like, well, now I don't immediately lump. I see them as distinctive. And then I try to find their connection. And then I manage that over time, or they become a hybrid. They become fused somehow.
Yeah. And I think it's important because, sometimes what we think is, okay, what's the Venn diagram? Where are they overlapping? Well, that's kind of a limited way to see them. It's more of how do they over time inform one another? If I go back to your point about thinking about our own careers as academics that are also putting on this hat of trying to speak to a broader audience. Well, sometimes those are very different activities. And for academics trying to write a translation book, you'd think it'd be easier to write, but actually it's harder to write in a way that you can convey these complex ideas in a very simple way while still conveying the complexity of it. It's not easy. And it's not the same as writing an academic paper. So sometimes it's a different mindset. So sometimes you have to switch into a very different mindset. And at the same time, at least for me, having written what we in academia call a translation book or a broader market book, has really deepened my understanding of what these ideas are and what are the challenges around these ideas and what are some deeper research questions I could ask about them. So over time, these are really reinforcing activities, even if in the moment it's not an overlapping experience.
Now, I could almost see that this is like a structured ritual that you bring into your organization when you're going to actually be doing some kind of whiteboarding session, right? This happens all the time for us at Sleeping Giant, or in our undergrad program, where they got a whiteboard, they have the problem, they're decomposing the problem typically and trying to find alternatives, right? Or drivers of that thing so they can get to alternatives. But I could see this as, folks come in and they follow this 3-step, or at least audit their whiteboard as they go through with these 3 steps. Have you done that with people?
Yes, and I think the important piece, typically is that first step of noticing that moving from the either or question to the both and, because the first step is, typically what we'll do is, okay, here's the alternatives. All right, so now let's have a discussion about which one to pick. And that's the first step, where the invitation is, okay, well, is there option C? We have option A and B. They're very different from one another. Before we choose, let's talk about what option C looks like and expand the possibilities around these ideas. And I think what an important piece of this is that oftentimes certainly if we think strategically, we can get into really big conflicts. Like person A and stakeholder group A really wants option in A because it benefits them. It's how they understand the world. It's what's really useful to them. Somebody else wants option B, and then it gets us into conflict. And this happens all the time where, it's a question of, okay, who wins, who loses. Well, this is where the win-win comes in, which is to say, okay, well, let me understand what's valuable to you about your option, and are there ways that we can take pieces of that and bring pieces of what's valuable to me and come up with something totally different. And this is what innovators, entrepreneurs do all the time, is say, I'm not going to take these existing categories and have to choose between them. I'm going to say, okay, well, what else is possible if I think about the best of both of these, or how can I see the value of these benefiting one another? That's a powerful reframe.
It's and it's fun because I had a conversation with Dacher Keltner from Berkeley on awe, right? And it was all emotion, right? We're talking all emotion and bodies, right? Is what we talk about. And there's certainly an emotional embodied element for paradox, but the power in some ways for me, at least as you're describing this, is the cognitive reframe that all of a sudden changes thinking and changes minds in the room, which produces these new ideas. And that is where if I think sometimes when people listen to maybe us talk, they're like, oh, those are the academics but that is where the real money is made, right? Is cognitively on these micro, how you're thinking about your choice set, how you're thinking about framing the question. It's that basic stuff like that that's going to guide you over here, it's going to guide you over there, and you won't even know it. That's the thing. You won't even know that you're over there and you need to be over there.
Yes, and right. Yes, and I mean, in some ways, I love that you brought up emotions because, um, uh, it's yes, and in order for us to open up this cognition, we need to grapple with what are the emotions that hold us back from thinking this way. So,
Yes.
and in fact, if this is like professional hazard, someone says to me, well, is it emotion or cognition? And so much of the research, if you go into the research, is about these mindsets. Well, what drives these mindsets? And in fact, in the book, we have a framework because any good book has a framework and right. And we worked very hard for this framework to have labels A, B, C, D. The important piece is that these labels sort of bring out these interdependent opposites of how we engage, right? And so A is our assumptions, our mindsets. C stands for comfort or our emotions. And we talk about it as finding comfort in the discomfort. And the important thing here is to empathize that these paradoxes, they sound so great and they sound so enabling, and they're like really emotionally hard to get our head around or to get our hearts around, because we come up with these conflicting ideas. They leave open all this uncertainty. We hate uncertainty. We want certainty. We want conclusive decisions. We don't want to leave things open. I had this experience the other day where my husband and I were grappling over what to do with a parenting challenge, and we just wanted an answer. And it didn't matter if it's his answer or my answer. We just wanted to get to an answer quickly because we wanted to move forward, as opposed to wait, maybe we should sit with this a little longer and leave it open. And entrepreneurs all the more so, like, let's get to an answer quickly. And this goes back to, well, we have to go slow to go fast, but that leaves open uncertainty that's uncomfortable. Okay, well, how do we deal with that to be able to keep open the question, how can we accommodate opposing things? So yes, and
Yeah, well, when you said that, I wrote down as I read your book, I said, I was putting down ideas, and it made me think of Dacher's work on awe. I'm enamored with this because it's such a opens your book, just like all of a sudden just you see it differently, and you can't unsee it once you see it. Is that a central quality of awe is things that are vast, that definition of awe is things that are vast. We're in the presence of something vast that goes beyond our current understanding. And I would imagine someone should do a study on awe and how experiences of awe makes you feel comfortable with mystery, the kind of
Mm.
the not knowing, and it sets you up for, the being able to deal with the paradox. And the other thought I have, because I experience this often, is I'm a, everybody will, this sounds cliche, but the cold exposure thing I find
Mm.
is super powerful on so many levels. But one is that you get more comfortable tolerating discomfort.
Yeah. Yeah.
You get, so if those, someone needs to do that, some of these interesting,
Yeah.
getting you in that right
Well, I'll tell you
mindset to
an
enter the
interesting
room.
study that I just came across. First of all, I think the important piece of what you just said, and I want to surface it and highlight it, which is importantly, and we say this in the book, it's not getting rid of discomfort. In fact, I was just listening to a
Mm-hmm.
podcast, by I don't know what year, but it was a political leader, Michelle Obama, right? And she said, like, even the number of people she spoke to at the political levels, none of them get rid of discomfort. It's about finding the tools to grapple with it, right? Grapple with our fears and our anxieties and know that they're there and deal with them. So I think that's important, which is, we talk about finding comfort in the discomfort, not getting rid of the discomfort. The second thing, though, is I was just talking with a colleague so I'm here in Australia at the University of Queensland in Brisbane, who did an amazing study and it's not exactly the experience of awe, but having people confront the grandeur of our universe, just how small we are as the Earth within the grandeur of the universe. And interestingly, what he found, and I can send you the study, is that people had very bifurcated experiences of this. For some people, it was like so exciting to open up that possibility. And for some people, it was really threatening. And he found that it had to do with people's sense of self-esteem. So, I wonder, like, what is cause and effect here? Like whether self-esteem enables us to see and to experience awe as enabling, or whether our experiences of awe help us build, or grandeur help us build self-esteem.
Mm-hmm.
And I think
I
it's
mean,
the same with paradox. Like, I think that I've been thinking about this, and I think this is a really interesting research question, right? I think that people have very different experiences of paradox, and we've seen that in the research that we've done. And, some people really shut down to it, where others are like, bring it on. So fascinating. I don't know what to do with this, but yeah. And I wonder if that has to do with our sense of self within the grandeur of the broader world to deal with this kind of, uh, you know, irrational, abstract sometimes, this holistic, very mysterious sometimes approach might have to do with, well, how comfortable do we feel in the moment that we're in?
so let's go back to, so now we're saying that, I'm taking your ideas and thinking like, how would I bring, if I wanted to bring them into, a company that we're working with, it sounds like there's some level of like getting people not emotionally primed, but maybe to be able to get in the right mindset to start to engage a change the question, separate and connect, belonging kind of framework. Is that what you've seen?
I think so. I mean, I don't know which goes first, the chicken or the egg, the emotions or the cognition. And, the cognition is an easier one to, I think, get lots of people on board with. And this idea of change the question. I mean, I do this. I run a women's leadership initiative, as you had mentioned, at my university, and my colleagues, my teammates know that if we come up with an either or, it's like professional hazard. They almost, for a long time, I would say, okay, guys, like, where's the both and here? Now they joke, okay, Wendy, where's the both and? Or just the other day, I loved it. I got a WhatsApp message from a friend who is planning an event for her son, and there's like this debate that's going on about where to host it, and this place has X and this place has Y. And she wrote me and she said, another friend of ours said to her, okay, what would Wendy say? Like, what's the both and? Where's the
Yeah.
both and? So I think that there is power in just changing the question, that it starts to create a practice and or a set of mental connections. And I think it's an easier way to get lots of people on board together, right? It reminds people. But just as any of the constructs that we play with in the research that we do, if we forget that these things are hard for people and we forget the emotional side, then, we lose people along the way. So I do think that you have to make space for psychological safety for people to say, this is scary for me, or, it's hard for me to get around this, or here's where it triggers anxiety for me, or here's where I'm feeling defensive. And the more that you can surface those emotions, right, that this to me feels like Amy Edmondson's psychological safety, that I can say those things so that they don't stand in the way of moving forward.
So it sounds like the easiest way to bring this into an organization is to just role model it.
Yeah.
Right. And then so much so that even you can become the joke, and that culturally,
Yeah.
then that's a there's if it's a joke, then it's seen and noticed by everyone, which means it's kind of like a thing. Right. And it's a norm. And then so you've
Yeah.
baked it somehow into your culture.
Yeah, and we know that that's good leadership, right? It's reinforcing the message again and again, finding a variety of different ways to convey the message so that people could hear it in the way that they want. We've been studying. My colleague Natalie Slowinski and I have been studying an amazing leader in Canada. Her name's Zita Cobb, and she runs an organization in Newfoundland called Shorefast, and it's the first story in our book. But the important component of it is that she has this very holistic mindset about how things work. And to get people on board, she's constantly telling stories, using metaphors. She has this great poem from a New Zealand poet, Glenn Calhoun, that everybody across the organization knows, which is the art of walking upright, which is the art of having, and I'm not saying the words exactly right, but essentially having one foot grounded for stability and one foot moving out to, so you can constantly see that metaphor as your innovation metaphor. We've got to have one foot grounded for stability and one foot moving forward to keep us going forward. And those are the ways that she continually reminds people, continually invites them back into this way of thinking along the way.
Are you putting this out on social media? Like what you
What
just
do you
said? Like what you just said? Because I mean, to me, yeah, there's so much, there's so much richness to your work, but there's also like this like really, really, really simple implementation, right? Which is one is just slightly tweak the question and be the person who slightly tweaks the question in the room. So much so that you become the joke. So that's like
Yeah.
one like super easy thing that you can do. Then the next thing you do is you just say a metaphor. We're going to be like this, and
Yeah.
this. And then you
Yeah.
just keep using that metaphor over and over again until you are shaping mindsets, right? That can be
Yeah.
as simple as bringing that in.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you a couple other metaphors. So we interviewed Terry Kelly, who was the CEO of W.L. Gore and Associates, the materials company that makes Gore-Tex jackets, and Gore-Tex. They used to in medical equipment and guitar strings and all this amazing things that comes out of Gore-Tex. And so their metaphor there was breathing. You gotta, in order to live, you gotta breathe in and breathe out. And this would come up for them because they had a very strong culture around small teams, moving, decision levels down, a lot of autonomy. But they also needed to bring their small teams in an integrated fashion at an enterprise-wide level. And people were really rebelling against that because that's not the Gore way. Well, we got to breathe in and breathe out. We've got to both have the power of small teams and we've got to work together at an enterprise level. So she would remind people of that. And I mean, what I love is that that on some level, and we do say this, like that is the first step in. We use this metaphor, which is change the question, and then invite people into rethinking this on an ongoing basis. And we like to use the metaphor of meditating because meditating is like a lifelong practice that requires you to keep coming back to the deeper and deeper experiences of this complex idea, which is getting zen and letting go. And, the paradox is the first step is changing the question. And the deeper you go, the more that you open up new ways of thinking. I mean, Marianne and I remember when we wrote one of our first pieces that came out in 2011, we were sitting around her table in Cincinnati. And we're like, oh, we got this. This is how it works. And it makes total sense. And then 3 seconds later, oh my God, we have no idea what we're talking about. And, it's living in that experience of awe that there's something bigger out there that we can constantly grapple with, but also we understand enough of it to encourage us to keep looking forward, to move beyond that tip of the iceberg and keep pushing forward along the way.
Mm. It's yeah, it's such a small mental shift, and you can see that shift can then impact so many areas of an organization. And how do you let's take that and focus on the specific instance of companies who are engaging that tension around financial and fill in the blank.
Yeah.
And we can talk about it, and all that hybrid B Corp, social, all that. And also people who, categorically are seen like that, but then organizations who are just thinking about these goals, right? They don't think about all this other stuff. It might be not baked in the organization. What is your advice to them, or what's your advice to how you adopt this mindset to really go after that area of a company? How do you take this and I mean, I know that your research is in this area as well, but that I experience it. I know your research on this. I know others' research from, related literatures on, org identity or institutional logics or, whatever that is. And it's just not easy to navigate. So how do you recommend organizations think about that challenge of financial plus as they think about the strategy of their company?
I love that. And I mean, so I'll just turn it, I have a couple of thoughts, but I mean, you've also been in this space. What's your sense? I'll turn it back to you for a second. What's your sense of how they engage with that?
Well, I think it's such a I'm living it. So it's fascinating to me to live it. I have so many thoughts about it. I don't have any coherent thoughts. I think I've certainly found cases where there's been an or when there's clearly an and. For instance, at Sleeping Giant, we have an aspiration that 50% of the companies that we invest in and the CEOs that we back will be women. Right now, that number is about 5%.
Mm.
So the notion of that as an if you want to label it equity, if you wanted to label it social justice, if you wanted to label it capitalism, because I'm pretty convinced that the women are going to generate better returns than the men. And it's approached as like, oh, this is more of like a diversity issue. And it's like, well, yes. And there's real returns that can be had financially from this. Let's not think about them as being opposing, or it's somehow kind of inherently like this is a problem to manage. I don't see one.
I love that. Oh, I love that example. Because again, it's on one hand, there is a set of activities that you have to do to reach out even more. It's not as obvious to have these female leaders, these female CEOs. So you do have to do a set of activities that's different to engage them. And, that might have short-term consequences because the cost of being able to do that is problematic, and it might have long-term financial benefits. So you could see how in the short term, this might feel like it's financial versus, but in the long term, it's not. It's holistic. It's interdependent. There's so much power right there.
Yes. Well, I mean, even as you say it, it's just more differentiated. I mean, the outreach and sourcing is more differentiated. So the CEOs we decide to we end up working with, we're going to attract that segment, right? And we're gonna win that. And I think that's going to be even better returns, right? So it's this, but it's not. I think I might, I was thinking about this for a while, but it's usually framed as an or, and it should be an and. But
absolutely.
So I see that as a the kind of change of mindset on it that I've experienced. But I also find that the temporal shifting thing is a real, let's focus on financial issues. Let's focus on this thing. There a lot of this kind of back and forth, and kind of the kind of juggling, spinning plate kind of feeling over time is my experience of it.
And one of the things that I hear you saying is that, again, it's you've got to zoom out in terms of the time frame, because part of the value, that it might be that you might not see the financial value in the short term, but that what you are seeing is the way that these things really reinforce each other in the long term.
Hmm.
So that what feels like it's costly initiatives, investing in your employees, investing in your community, investing in innovation that's going to shift environmental practices. The problem is that it feels like an or, because in the short term, it feels like, oh, well, that's going to ruin our bottom line or what have you. It's the being able to see the holistic picture over time that becomes very powerful. And in fact, here we have this metaphor. So here's the metaphor for this one that we use, and we like metaphors, as you can see. But the idea is that, and taking the long-term vision is actually part of the shift of mindset that helps you take the both and the bigger picture, longer term vision, piece. The idea is that if you're on a boat and you're living in that rocky waters where things feel really choppy, what you're told to do to sort of have a deeper sense of calm and be able to is look out to the horizon, look out farther to the horizon. And that's the image, which is, it feels really choppy because, oh, it's so much easier and so much more risk averse to invest in these men that are right there and have great ideas, but we're not doing the digging to actually explore. There's a deeper sense here that can get us to a better place. And Doug, I want to just highlight that, because I think this is one of the biggest problems in the diversity conversation, which is that we pit diversity initiatives against performance initiatives, and that could not be more problematic to
Hmm.
understanding why
Hmm.
we're trying to bring in a variety of different voices, not just because it is normatively and morally the right thing to do, also because it actually is what's going to help us solve the problems that we have as an organization and as a world more powerfully.
And 100%, 110%, and and the fact is that organizations have distinct competencies to be able to make moves on certain things versus other things. And we have
Yeah.
this expectation that categorically, if you engage in something related to anything related to diversity, that it must show up some way. Like it must be isomorphic in every versus everybody plays a role in this, and how they play and what they do might be different. And that cumulatively, if everyone focuses on where they can create unique value, so everyone in society gets lifted, right? It doesn't need to be everyone doing it the same.
And let me throw out anher and that you just referred to, because in our research and in academia, right, there's things like identity that's really helpful because it helps focus, right? Whether it's our organizational identity, our personal identity, creates alignment, creates focus. Or organizations, we like to think of how valuable it is to have alignment across structure. So those things are helpful because they're congruent, they bring things together, but they're also double-edged. They create this double-edged sword where, by creating this reinforcing, like, we know who we are, we know what we do, we're all aligned, it's useful, and it keeps us stuck in who we are today and not lets us grow.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we enable that kind of convergence and divergence, that kind of alignment and congruence, and expanding out and trying new things? So there's a big and, right, stability and change. There's a big and right there that great leaders know how to navigate, and it can feel like a rocky roller coaster.
And it's so authentic, you never change.
Right. Yeah. Authentic. Like, I don't know if you remember, our colleague, who's now at INSEAD, Hermie Barra, has this
Mm-hmm.
paper in HBR called the authenticity paradox, right? Which is, do I fit? Am I comfortable? Well, that's great to feel like you feel authentic and you fit and you're comfortable. It also means that you're not growing outside your comfort zone and changing. And whether that's
Mm-hmm.
you at the individual level, do I fit in this organization? Okay, well, as soon as you fit, you know that you're not growing. Well, does the organization fit with it? Well, as soon as it fits and it's structured, it's not growing and changing. You got to live in both of those. One foot, grounded, that fits and feels authentic, and one foot reaching out, that's uncomfortable and trying new things.
So I'm just going to end with spotlighting another thing I'm taking away from this, which is, that horizon metaphor, that long termness enables paradox. It
Yeah.
enables, because it gives you the horizon to be able to oscillate, and what that's going to do is that's going to allow these novel combination of parts, right?
Yeah.
These different ways of thinking about things that don't seem like they work together now, but if we think long term, we can see how they resolve them or they work together into something else, which is a beautiful idea.
Yeah, I love that. As you say that, I have a favorite book from the 70s. It's called The Tao of Physics, and it's by this author, Freehoff Capra, and he is I don't know if quantum physics is his background, but he talks about how the deeper you go into our physical world, the more you see these interdependent opposites. So he opens the book by saying that he's sitting on the cliffs of, I think, California somewhere, looking out into this beautiful, awe-inspiring setting. And I think he either alludes to, or he very directly says that he's like has smoked something and he's high, and that's how he can all of a sudden see these novel interdependent waves coming together. And I love that. And I think our goal in the world is to help people see this possibility, this awe-inspiring interdependence, without necessarily having to be high and having smoked something sitting on the cliffs of California. So that's our goal that we're hoping for.
We're just going to pretend that we got there by sitting at the May meeting, having this conversation, right?
Yes.
In the
Kudos to our
in
May meeting friends
in the
that always are awe-inspiring.
yes, no, it's the one conference that, I really, when I leave, it's like, wow, it's just great conversation about really interesting things, and personally, professionally, intellectually, it's a great, I'm hoping to get back next year. So.
And let's give a shout out to our colleague, Amy Resnesky at Yale University, who has convened a really powerful conversation across people. So
she has made that happen.
yeah.
It's really, really cool. Well, great to talk to you. Your book is wonderful. And so many interesting, powerful ideas that they're not complicated, that you can start to just work on. So I learned a lot.
Thank you. And Doug, I'll say, if anyone has stuck with us to the end here, and I hope some people have, people are welcome to reach out to me and connect. It's always so valuable to hear how these ideas land for people.
And where they can go to your website, they can find you on LinkedIn.
Yeah, well, both, but the easy one-stop shop is our website, bothandthinking.net, that has all our social media, has a whole bunch of pieces that we've written around this, and has blurbs from the book, and all of, there's a discussion guide. There's plenty of stuff there as the first step.
Wonderful. Well, great to chat with you. I'll let you know when this is out, and thanks again.
Yeah, such a pleasure.